Welcome back to the deep dive. We're continuing our journey through the MPEP, the Manual of Patent Examining Procedure, trying to make sense of it all.
That's the plan. We're aiming for understandable breakdowns, section by section.
And today we're in Chapter 2100, which is all about patentability. Specifically, we're diving into Section 2121.
Right. Section 2121, prior art, general level of operability required to make a prima facie case. It sounds a bit dense, but it's really fundamental stuff.
Yeah, it really gets into how examiners look at what's already out there, the prior art, when they're deciding if your invention is, well, patentable. We want to unpack operability and enablement for you.
Exactly. Understanding this section helps you figure out how prior art might affect your application and, how to respond if an examiner cites something against you.
Okay, let's jump in. The first big idea in 2121 seems to be this: presumption. A presumption of operability and enablement.
That's it. Basically, when an examiner cites a piece of prior art, could be an old patent, a journal article, whatever, they start with an assumption.
An assumption
that the thing described in that prior art reference actually works, or could work, that's operability, and more importantly, that the reference enables someone to make and use it.
enabling, meaning it gives enough detail.
Enough detail for someone who knows the field, what we call a person of ordinary skill in the art, to actually build or practice the invention without, having to invent stuff themselves or do tons of trial and error.
So the examiner isn't required right off the bat to prove this old reference is perfectly described or even works.
Not initially, no. There's a case in Re-Intermediate Core that makes this clear. The examiner doesn't carry the initial burden of proving the prior art is enabling. They just need to find it and point it out, basically.
Okay, so if they cite something, the ball is then in your court as the applicant.
Pretty much. Once the examiner establishes what's called a Prima Facie Case, meaning they've cited relevant prior art and explained why it's relevant, the burden shifts. It's up to you to argue, with evidence if needed, why that reference isn't enabling.
So let's say you get that rejection, and the prior art looks shaky. Maybe it seems incomplete. You need to be ready to explain why someone couldn't just pick it up and make the invention work.
Exactly. You'd point out the missing steps, the contradictions, maybe why it would require undue experimentation. That's the key phrase to get from that description to a working invention.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, 2121 also talks about a uniform standard. Does that mean it doesn't matter where the prior art came from?
That's right. It doesn't matter if it's a U.S. patent, a German patent, a research paper from Japan. They're all held to the same standard when it comes to enablement.
Seriously. So a U.S. patent isn't somehow considered more enabling than a foreign one?
Nope. The MPEP is clear, and a case called In Re Morton really drove this home. The courts rejected making distinctions based on the source or nationality. It's all about the content. What does the document actually teach?
Well, that seems helpful for the listener. You don't need different rule books depending on the prior art's origin.
It definitely simplifies the evaluation. The question is always, does this reference teach someone skilled in the art how to make and use the invention? Simple as that. Or, well, not always simple, but the standard is consistent.
Okay, here's one that feels a bit counterintuitive. Efficacy isn't required for enablement. What on earth does that mean?
Yeah, this one trips people up sometimes. It means the prior art reference doesn't actually have to prove the invention works well, or even works at all, to be considered ennobling.
Wait, really? So it just has to describe how to make it, even if the resulting thing is useless?
Essentially, yes. The focus for enablement, especially in the context of anticipation under Section 102, is on the how-to instructions. Does it tell you how to put it together? Does it tell you how to use it, even if using it doesn't achieve much?
Is there case law on this?
Absolutely. Impax Labs v. Aventis Farm is a key one. The Federal Circuit specifically said proof of efficacy isn't required for a reference to anticipate an invention under 102.
Okay, let's try that laundry basket example again. So prior art describes a super complex self-folding basket. Gears, levers, the whole deal. But there's no proof it actually folds properly.
Right.
It could still be enabling if it clearly shows how to assemble all those gears and levers, even if the result is a basket that, maybe just jams.
Exactly. If the instructions for building it are clear enough for someone skilled in the art, it meets the enablement standard for anticipation. Whether it's a good invention or commercially viable, that's a separate question, often more relevant for obviousness later on.
Right, okay. So we know the examiner presumes enablement, but what if you, the applicant, look at the cited art and think, No way, this is not enabling. How do you fight back?
Well, you challenge it. Section 2121 covers this. One approach comes from a case in remorsa. It suggests you might be able to successfully argue non-enablement if the flaws are right there in the document itself.
What do you mean flaws right in the document, like apparent on its face?
Yeah, exactly that phrase. It might be that the description is contradictory, or it leaves out absolutely critical information, or describes something physically impossible according to known scientific principles. If it's that flawed, you might argue it's non-enabling just based on reading it, without needing extra experiments or declarations.
Okay, that seems like a strong position if the prior art is genuinely deficient.
Yeah.
What about combining references? Examiners do that sometimes, right?
They do, especially for anticipation under Section 102. They might take element A from one reference and element B from another, but Section 2121 is clear. The combination of those references has to provide a complete, enabling disclosure of your claimed invention.
So they can't just stitch together bits and pieces if the resulting Frankenstein's monster doesn't actually tell someone how to build and use your specific thing.
Precisely. The combined teachings have to get someone skilled in the art all the way there, without that undue experimentation we talked about. If crucial gaps remain even after combining them, it's not an enabling disclosure.
Okay. Now, we focused a lot on anticipation section 102, where the prior art describes the exact same invention. But what about obviousness, section 103? Can prior art that's not enabling still be used there?
Yes. This is a critical point. Even if you successfully argue a reference isn't enabling enough to anticipate your invention under 102, it can absolutely still be used as part of an obviousness rejection under 103.
How does that work? If you can't build the thing from the reference, how does it make my invention obvious?
Think about what the reference still teaches. A case, Symbol Technologies Inc., v. Opticon Inc., touched on this. Even an inoperative device described in prior art might still disclose useful concepts, components, or design approaches.
Still struggling a bit with that one. An analogy, maybe.
Okay, think about maybe an old blueprint for a flying machine from like the 1800s. It uses materials that we now know couldn't possibly work. The engine design is flawed. It would never fly. So it's not enabling for building a working aircraft today. But that blueprint might still show a novel wing shape or a particular mechanism for steering, even if the overall machine is junk. Someone skilled in aeronautics today might look at that wing shape, combine it with modern materials and engines, and arrive at an invention. The old, flawed blueprint still contributed a piece of the puzzle, potentially making the final invention obvious.
Okay, the flawed blueprint analogy helps. So even if the prior art as a whole doesn't work, pieces of its teaching can still be combined with other knowledge to argue obviousness.
You got it. The reference contributes to the general pool of knowledge available to that person skilled in the art, even if it's not a perfect working example itself.
Wow, okay. Lots of nuances there. So let's try and wrap this deep dive into section 2121. What are the absolute must-remember points for our listeners?
Okay, key takeaways. 1. Prior art cited by an examiner is generally presumed enabling. The burden is on you to rebut that. 2, the standard is uniform U.S. patents, foreign patents, publications, all judged the same way on enablement. 3, efficacy doesn't matter for enablement. It's about the how-to, not does it work well. 4, you can challenge non-enabling art, sometimes based on the reference itself. 5, combining references is allowed, but the combo must fully enable your invention. And 6, critically, even non-enabling art can still be used to show your invention was obvious.
That's a great summary. Understanding these points seems crucial for navigating the patent system effectively.
It really is. It affects how you write your application, how you search for prior art, and definitely how you respond to the patent office.
Definitely. And before we sign off, just want to give a quick shout out. This whole MPP series, including this deep dive, owes a lot to the vision and guidance of Mike Shepard, our creative director.
Hear, hear! Mike's efforts have been key in pulling this all together and making it accessible.
Absolutely. Okay, and now for our usual very important disclaimer. Remember, everyone, this summary was put together with the help of AI tools like ChatGPT and Notebook LM. It might have errors, it might miss things.
It's for education and information only. It is definitely not legal advice.
Correct. For the real deal, the authoritative stuff, you always need to consult the official MPEP itself, or talk to a qualified instructor, or a registered patent attorney or agent.
Couldn't stress that enough. Use this as a starting point, but always verify with official sources and professionals.
So that wraps up our look at MPP section 2121. Hopefully you've got a clearer picture now of how operability and especially enablement of prior artwork in patent examination. Think about how that presumption of enablement changes things and how art can be used differently for anticipation versus obviousness.
And maybe a final question to chew on. Think about your own field. Could there be older, maybe even flawed or incomplete prior art out there that still holds nuggets of information or ideas that could influence how someone sees a new development today? Recognizing those imperfect teachings can be really powerful.